Welcome to Conversate, our podcast where we engage in conversation. On this week's episode, I, Aaron Gerke, have the privilege of sitting down with special guest Greg Holz. Greg is a college friend of mine, but has been serving as a missionary in Cambodia for the last 15 years. It's a wide-ranging conversation where we talk about how somebody becomes an overseas missionary, and we even talk about the history and politics of Cambodia itself. It's something a little bit different today, but as always, we really hope you enjoy it.
Hi, Greg.
Hi, Aaron.
Welcome to the brown couch. You're dripping coffee, though. You spilled on yourself. You were so excited to be on the podcast. You just spilled coffee.
Yep.
Well, to those of you who are just listening to the podcast, this is not Pastor Kevin's voice. I'm sitting here with Greg Holz, an old college friend of mine. Greg serves as a missionary in Cambodia with an organization that he helped to start called Crossing Cambodia.
Yep.
But Greg, before we get to the modern day, Crossing Cambodia and what you guys do, I think that's what I would like to talk about on the podcast today. Just some people who listen to this, probably were at church when you presented or have met you before, but it's possible that there are people just meeting you for the first time. But how long have you been in Cambodia, like living in Cambodia?
I first got to Cambodia January 2007, so close to 15 years now.
Okay. And what got you to Cambodia? Let's start with Cambodia, but then we're going to go back even farther.
So how far back do we take this?
Well, maybe we should go all the way back. What got you interested? Let's do this. What got you interested in just even wanting to be a missionary overseas?
We could go way, way back to what got me to the point of wanting to be a missionary, but I'll just start with wanting to be a missionary. It
right.
largely started with going on a mission trip to Thailand while I was in college.
Okay.
During freshman year, I was approached by a friend who wanted someone to help out with the campus mission group.
Okay.
They were trying very hard to convince me to go on this mission trip to Thailand and to be the treasurer for the Concordia Mission Society.
Uh-huh.
And I was trying very hard to get out of it until they told me that the trip to the mission trip the next year was going to be to Thailand, and board members got first dibs on the trip. And, wouldn't you know it, my thought was, cool, I could go to Thailand and someone else will pay for it.
Yeah.
Free trip to Thailand, the most noble reason to ever go on a mission trip, obviously.
Of course. And did it work out? You got your trip paid for?
I did get the trip paid for. I mean, I had to pitch in and work my butt off with the fundraising to help out with that.
Okay.
We went on the trip, and, while I was on the trip, the stuff I thought I was going to be doing was not what I ended up doing anyways. A lot of the rest of the team did go to the markets and to different places, but we were at this hostel for tribal children in northern Thailand who would come from the hills to go to school in the city. Okay. And I ended up hanging out at this hostel with all these teenagers trying to speak Thai, and
Did you learn any before you went?
Nope.
Oh, okay.
Didn't learn any Thai, had no real concept of what the language was or what happened in Thailand. I knew Thai food was pretty good, and that was about it.
Okay.
And while I was hanging out with these teenagers, just something clicked, and I enjoyed hanging out with people who spoke a different language, trying to connect with them. And everyone else went off and did touristy things while I kept hanging out with these teenagers. Huh. And at that point, I started thinking, I kind of want to do this.
Okay. Yeah. Was it the next year or 2 years later that you and I went on a mission trip then together to Kazakhstan, which is also
would have been the next year.
Totally different.
January 2005 was when you and I went.
Okay. Yeah. That was a cool experience too. So somewhere in there you ended up switching degrees, correct? Because you weren't planning on being an overseas missionary, but then you switched
originally
degrees.
I was in the DCE program. Not sure of what I wanted to do. Thought I'd do youth ministry. At one point I thought maybe I'd just transfer out and go to the University of Minnesota to study architecture, but Doc Schuler's New Testament class convinced me otherwise. And once I started doing the mission trips and realized I kind of wanted to go overseas, I switched from DCE to the DCO track.
Okay, and the DCO, from a director of Christian education to director of Christian outreach,
Yes.
right? And that's
So
okay.
I finished the coursework, got a degree in Christian outreach, never actually got certified as a DCO though, and a few years ago went down to Concordia, Texas, and got myself certified as a DCE though.
Okay.
So kind of came back full circle.
So that's kind of how you got interested in the mission field. But how did you first what was your first missionary stint in Cambodia?
So I originally signed on with LCMS World Mission.
Okay.
And I told them I want to go to Thailand.
Okay.
But I don't want to teach English because I hate teaching.
Okay.
It's not my skill. Just a quick aside, everyone always talks about it's amazing what I do going overseas. I think it's amazing what teachers do because I could never stand in front of a classroom of 20 plus kids on a daily basis and not try to kill them. So,
And that's speaking kindly.
Yes, exactly. So, but yeah, I said, I want to go to Thailand, but I don't want to teach English. And LCMS said, well, we have nothing for you to do in Thailand. We don't currently have a position in Vietnam either, but in between is Cambodia, and there was a church there that asked for help. And they said, all right, we're going to send you to Cambodia.
Okay.
And that's how I ended up in Cambodia. Not quite sure what they were thinking at the time.
Okay.
I was the first Lutheran they ever sent to this city of Battambang. 22-year-old kid, straight out of college. Really was not given any direction other than help the church there. That's all I was told to do.
Okay.
And wouldn't you know it, they just dropped me out there. My supervisor showed up, got me a visa, took me up there. I found an apartment, and they said, all right, we'll see you next month.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you speak the language at that point?
No, I did not. I found a teacher, started learning the language, and about 4 months later, I started dating my wife, and my language ability kind of went through the roof at that point.
Okay. How do you say I love my wife in Khmer?
Nyom sralang prapun nyom klang na.
Well, there you go. And we don't know if we can challenge that, but we believe that that's what you said. So, yeah, because you're essentially fluent in the language now. I mean, we were talking about it the other night where you said you kind of got to there's a difference between like speaking another language and being kind of like bilingual where it just happens, right?
There's a point you get to where you can just switch seamlessly between the two languages. So there's a difference between being bilingual and actually doing that and just knowing another language.
Yeah.
Translation takes a little bit of effort to kind of make it understandable to someone else, but like in my brain, I just instantly comprehend what somebody says in Khmer.
Yeah. No, it's remarkable because I was, eavesdropping on a phone call you had with your wife the other day, and I thought maybe you were switching languages when you didn't want me to understand like what you were saying. But I asked you if you even knew that you were like you would go back and forth between English and Khmer, back and forth. But you said you didn't even notice. So that's just fascinating. But let's just transition a little bit. So you worked with LCMS World Mission for a while, and then eventually branched off and started crossing Cambodia, right? But you had, well, tell me. I mean, you don't have to go into all the details of like why that happened, but you had started getting involved with the ministry with the street children, right? Before even switching up.
Yeah. So I had kind of gone off and become an independent missionary, just kind of working with whoever was willing to let me work out there.
Okay.
And I got involved with the local church, and one day another missionary came to our church and asked, is there anything we could do for some homeless families?
Okay.
I didn't know much about homeless families at the time. I did not realize the challenges I was getting into or why other people weren't working with them at the time. I just knew that this was put in front of me, and it felt like God was saying, do something. So I knew that there were other ministries that worked with kids at a local dump in Phnom Penh in the capital, where they'd bring kids in as like a daycare. And I thought, well, I could do something like that. We started just out of this local church. We'd go out a couple days a week, pick up whatever kids were willing to come to church, feed them, clean them up, and play with them for an afternoon.
Okay.
And that kept growing. It started out with, maybe 5, 6 kids. And then once they all learned to trust me, that kind of turned into a dozen kids. And then when I started to realize it was getting bigger than I could handle, I hired a children's minister to help me out. And this local person then took the same budget I was working with and figured out how to feed, more than 3 times that many kids.
Huh.
And so suddenly our program exploded to 30 plus kids every time we go out.
Okay.
And from that, as we got to know the kids, we kind of realized there's a lot of needs in their life that weren't being met, and that there was a lot of societal influence, or I guess bias, working against these kids. And that's when we decided we needed to start a ministry specifically to them, to care for them and go deeper into their lives, so that they would know the love of God and why we were doing this for them.
That's awesome. I know you've shared it in church, but if you don't mind just briefly sharing again, kind of culturally, the way that these children are looked down upon, or that the homeless are looked down upon, and it's kind of goes back to a religious viewpoint, right? Of that whole idea of karma, right?
Yeah.
Which in America, people talk about karma, but kind of flippantly,
Right.
Almost like this superstitious type thing. But in Cambodia, that's actually part of the religion, yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, can you explain that?
Well, I think, in America we have this idea of karma as this instant kind of balancing of the universe. You do something bad happens to you. It's not necessarily how it always works, especially, when you really look at Buddhism. Throughout your life, whatever you're doing, you're accumulating these points, basically. I guess it's karma, or sometimes called dharma. And so when you are reincarnated in your next life, that all your karma is taken into account to determine where you will be in your next life. So if you are a particularly good person, you may actually be born again in a better station in life, into a wealthy family. If you're a bad person, you'll come back in a lower station in life, to a poorer family. And unfortunately, a lot of people interpret that as to mean that if you're a homeless person, you must have done something awful in your previous life or lives in order to deserve what's happening to you.
I don't think I've ever asked that question. So in Buddhism then, if you are a poor person and they believe that you did something bad in your past life, is there any way to be like a good poor person and get yourself back on a higher standing?
Well, yeah, you're supposed to live a good life and, accept your penance. And, if you live well, if you don't steal, if you don't cheat, then you will get reincarnated in a better position in the next life. So you can be a good person, but unfortunately, that's kind of hard to do when you're stuck at the bottom of society.
Yeah, for sure. So how have you seen Christianity, or the grace extended? Which I think that you're living that out by doing these works of mercy, feeding and clothing and tending to the least of these, which Jesus commands us to do. Have you seen the gospel, the good news of Jesus, and that we're saved by grace? Does that ring a certain kind of bell to the people who are being told you're not worth anything?
It does. These kids, their families are told you are not worth anything. You deserve what you have. And a lot of people take that to mean we don't need to help you because you're being punished for what you did. Mm-hmm. And when all of society is telling you that you're worthless, and we get to come in and say, hey, no, you are not. You're a child of God. You are beloved, and it's not just us that loves you. There is a God above all beings that loves you. That is really appealing to a lot of these families.
Yeah, that's awesome. And when you mention the families, how have those relationships, or have there ever been relationships established, not only with the children but the families of these children? Like, how does
Yeah.
that work?
So through our ministry, we try to connect with the families. We are a small ministry, so unfortunately, we don't have a lot of support ministry for the parents or for the families. But we do try to communicate with them regularly. We go out and talk to the families where they are at. That's part of how our application process works, is anytime somebody wants their kid to come to us, we go out and we do an interview with the family, talk to them, why do they want their kids to go to school. We try to determine which kids need it the most. We regularly bring families into our center just to have a meal with them and communicate with them about what's going on, what we're teaching their children, how they can help support us. And so we're able to kind of communicate with the families and just work with them on some level, just to let them know, here's what we're doing and why we're doing it, and hopefully through that we communicate God's love and message.
Yeah, awesome. I know over the years when you started crossing Cambodia, if I remember right, it was younger kids, and you were helping them get to school. But then they've gotten to a certain age, or they become teenagers or graduate, and it's harder to kind of keep tabs on them. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. Historically, most kids would drop out of school probably by the 6th grade. I know that's improving in Cambodia as the country develops. Mm-hmm. And so when we started, our stated goal with the kids was we want to get them through the 12th grade. We want to get them as far as possible, because the longer they're in school, the better their job prospects are, the better their opportunities are to care for their own families. Mm-hmm. But we started working mainly with smaller kids. Now, as these kids have grown up, we're just starting to realize there are a lot of challenges working with teenagers that we should have seen coming, but we, like all parents and all families are with teenagers, we were blindsided when they became teenagers. It's not so much hard to keep tabs on them, but they want their independence. They want to find jobs to go earn some extra money for themselves. They don't want to spend all their time hanging around with tiny little children. Mm-hmm. So we are kind of wrestling with that. How do we create their own kind of a space, like a youth group kind of space, so that they can be apart from the younger kids, so that they can have that independence but still be a part of our program.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you said it in church on Sunday, something about teenagers. You said something like, humans have been dealing with teenagers for thousands of years, and you would have thought that we would have figured out what to do with them right now. So I guess I'm happy to know that you guys also don't have the solution in Cambodia. But if you did, it would be nice to know what the solution was. Yeah, so I guess I'm just curious if you could kind of take us out of the ministry a little bit, and the culture of Cambodia, for those that aren't familiar with it. What's the general kind of socioeconomic, political culture of Cambodia? Is it? I guess. Is it a rich nation? Is it a poor nation? How does the government operate? I don't know. I'm always curious about those kinds of things. That's a big question.
It is a big question. There's a lot of different areas to squeeze into one answer, but
just talk for a while then.
If we're just going by I guess the average income, it's still considered one of the poorer countries in Asia. Just in the time that I've been there, it's pretty dramatic how much it's developed.
Oh.
When I first got out there, we could easily hire a full-time church worker for maybe $50, $60 a month. And now, in order for us to be reasonable, we're off, our starting salaries are now up over $200 a month.
Oh.
So it's still a lot less money than what people in the U.S. may expect, but it's gradually improving. The cost of living is going up. The general availability of amenities is increasing.
Okay.
That said, there is a pretty big gap between the rich and the poor. There's a lot of super rich people kind of at the top of society, and then there's the bottom, and then there's just a very small emerging middle class there right now.
Okay. And then the government did. I can't remember. I know I've done this history with you many times, and I can't even remember. But it's not a democracy, is it? Or
I mean, on the face of it, it's a democracy.
okay.
Yeah. The same party has kind of won the elections every 5 years for the past 30 years. The same guy has been prime minister that whole time. So it's, they allow elections in opposition parties, but it's always won by the same people. So, you got to kind of read between the lines on that.
Okay. Gotcha. But then just in case anybody doesn't know or hasn't looked up Cambodia on a map yet, while we're talking, what nations surround Cambodia?
So Cambodia is in Southeast Asia. So on the west side, you'd have Thailand. On the east side, you have Vietnam. It's kind of sandwiched in between the two.
Okay. Yeah, that's right. Okay. Yeah, and there's a whole lot of fascinating history there too, with the Khmer Rouge and all that kind of stuff too, coming out of Vietnam, right? How quick can you do that history of Cambodia?
I mean, just a basic rundown. I mean,
Yeah.
you can go back. You can go way back, actually. Cambodia, I guess their society kind of goes back 1,000, 1,500 years or so. At one point, they were this big empire that covered almost all of Southeast Asia. And if you got any high school students that listen to this podcast, Angkor Wat and the city of Angkor is a pretty good history project if you want to score some good points with your teachers. Because the city of Angkor, after the fall of Rome, before the Industrial Revolution, the city of Angkor was actually the largest city in the world.
Huh.
And they built Angkor Wat, which is the largest temple in the world. And that's actually a source of pride for most Cambodians. It's a very important part of their culture and their history. But over time, their empire collapsed. The Thai people, the Vietnamese people kind of moved in and took over a lot of their lands. And the country gradually shrank until about what it is now. The French took it over in the mid-1800s, made it into one of their colonies, exploited it, kind of suppressed education, which fomented a rebellion out in the jungles, which eventually, once we get up towards the 60s, when the Vietnam War starts to happen, the communists are the one who are able to unite all these fighting rebel groups into one unit, and that kind of kicks off this other civil war within the country. And then about 1975, as the U.S. is pulling out of Vietnam, they leave Cambodia, and the Khmer Rouge, who were the communists, came to power. They went into the cities, they took over all the government institutions, and their first order of business was to evacuate all the cities, to get everybody out of there. This was, they told everyone there was going to be a bombing and they wanted to protect everyone, when really they just wanted to get everyone out of the cities quick, and they wanted them to not be carrying a whole lot of stuff. Because what they then did is they made people march for miles and miles and miles. And this is in April, which is the hottest part of the year. They march for miles and miles and miles, and so as they're marching, they're just dropping their possessions until they get to these registration camps, by which time they have nothing left. And that was actually very intentional on the part of the Khmer Rouge. They wanted people to have nothing, and then they sent them to go to different labor camps because they wanted everyone to be equal, at the level of the peasants when they started to build their new perfect society.
Wow. That was in 75?
Yep, that was in 1975. So they did that. They sent everyone to labor camps. They started purging the population of anyone who they claimed had Western corruption. So anyone who was connected to the old government, a lot of old military leaders, police officers, a lot of academics who had Western education. It even got to the point where if you owned books with the English language in it, you were deemed an academic, and these people would have been arrested, sent to prison camps. There was a lot of paranoia, and they were always looking for spies, and it actually got to the point where the more spies you found, it was deemed to be a very effective prison camp. So the next step was that the prison camps obviously wanted to get as many confessions out of prisoners as they could, so they would just torture people till they made confessions. Then they would take them out to these fields, which is where the term the killing fields came from. They would execute them and dump them in mass graves. So they killed hundreds of thousands of people this way. And then when you get rid of anyone who knows how to run a country, all the engineers, all the people who are capable of maintaining the country, basically their infrastructure completely collapsed. A lot of the agricultural output they had, the rice that they were growing, they were trading away to China for ammunition and weapons. And people began to starve. They didn't have enough food. Nobody wanted to admit that they weren't meeting their quotas, so they just withheld food from all their workers. And it got to the point where roughly between 2 and 3 million people died in Cambodia, mostly from starvation, disease, being overworked. And that all happened in a span of less than 4 years.
Wow. So then how did communism end there?
Well, it kind of didn't end right away. What happened was, South Vietnam, as I was saying, used to be part of Cambodia, and that's always been a very kind of a nationalist kind of point of, pride or contention in Cambodia. I mean, they still call it Lower Cambodia when Cambodians talk about South Vietnam. And, the Pol Pot, the leader of the communists, kind of had this vision of reclaiming it, and he kind of would poke the Vietnamese and do border raids. And at one point, Vietnam was about to go to war with China, and China was supporting the Khmer Rouge, and so the Khmer Rouge were offering to let China build bases in Cambodia. So Vietnam kind of used the border raids as a pretext to invade Cambodia and overthrow the Khmer Rouge. I don't think they quite knew about everything going on with the genocide, but once they found out about it, they kind of used that as a justification for their invasion.
Wow.
The Khmer Rouge were then forced back into the mountains. The Vietnamese kind of installed their own government, and the Khmer Rouge continued to fight a civil war for nearly 20 years after that.
Wow. That's fascinating, Greg. Those of you who are listening, again, if you're a high school student especially, now go take that research and go write a paper or something. But no, there's so much to learn there, and to think about how recent that history is. And I mean, you've been there 15 years, which is, not all that long after all this stuff is happening. And I know your wife's family was all, part of all that stuff too. Didn't her dad, or she had relatives die in part of it?
She had relatives that died. Her mother's first and second husbands both died at the hands of the Khmer Rouge, and my wife would have had, I think, maybe 3 older brothers or sisters that all died during the Khmer Rouge.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so real, it's real. That's real. So we just put all that into context, kind of coming back full circle to the ministry that you do to the least of these who are there even still today, bringing food, bringing shelter, education, clothing, cleanliness, and most of all the gospel and the good news of Jesus, which is where we believe we have life everlasting, right? And then the hope and peace and purpose that comes only through Jesus. So. Greg, as we kind of round out this conversation, if people are listening and they're not aware yet of how to support the work that you're doing in Cambodia, where can they go online to do that? Or can you make gifts online?
You can make gifts online. Just go to our website, www.crossingcambodia.org. That has all the information there. If you want to mail a check, our address is on there. If you want to donate online, it'll take you to our donation page. We process everything online through a company called GiveButter. So if you click the donate and it takes you to another page, that's not something to worry about.
And when your mailing address is in Minnesota, that's
yes.
Yes, you have a board of directors.
Yes, we are a 501c3 nonprofit.
Yeah.
So all donations are tax deductible.
Yeah. So none of that's skeptical, or don't be skeptical of that, right?
Right.
Awesome. Well, Greg, it was great hanging out with you again this weekend. We're super grateful that you made the trek up here to the North Woods and got to see a little snow, and maybe you can box some up in a cooler and bring it to your kids. Yeah, we pray God's blessings on you and your work there, and that God's will be done. His light will continue to shine through you guys. So, thanks for sitting on the brown couch today and sharing about Christ in Cambodia.
Thank you.
All right, peace out, buddy.